Hello everybody and welcome to the Oxfordshire Maternity Voices, one of two small, I'm calling them podcasts, but they're not podcasts because they're recorded Zoom sessions, Zoomcasts.
Podcasts.
Yeah, that's a do, yeah. And we're doing these for Babyloss Awareness Week. So I have a collection of absolutely fantastic women here who have all experienced loss, baby loss in the earlier sort of period of baby loss. So we're going to be having a chat about that today. So if I could ask everyone to just introduce themselves, and if I can start with Steph, I'll put you in the hotspot first.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Steph. I live in Bicester and I'm 36. And my loss was 8 weeks into the pregnancy. It was my first pregnancy and only pregnancy. I've not managed to conceive again. And yeah, I'm just here to talk about that and what a shock it was because I knew nothing about baby loss at that point.
Okay, thanks. Jess?
Yep, I'm Jess. I am 34 years old and I live in Abingdon in Oxfordshire. I had my loss, I have one successful pregnancy and a nearly 3-year-old. My loss came as my second pregnancy. It came earlier this year and it was in the middle of coronavirus when we were sort of at the height of lockdown. It was also a late-term pregnancy, a late-term loss rather, so it was at around 17 weeks.
Thank you. And Louise?
Hi there, I'm Louise. I've got one son who's 4.5. I'm here really because in order to have my son, I had quite a lot of fertility treatment, so IUIs and IVF, because I've got a wife, so I'm in a same-sex partnership. So I'm here to talk about that and how that factors into the idea of early baby loss, which I hadn't really considered until Claire and I had a discussion about it earlier this year, and about embryos and baby loss and early baby loss and how that factors in. So I'm here with that slant, and I'm 37.
Oh, you remembered, that's good.
I worked that out, yeah.
So hello, I'm Claire. I have had 2 successful pregnancies, my second of which is hopefully going to stay asleep throughout this. Before I had my daughter, I had 3 losses, and they were all around the 6 to 7 week mark. So they were early. And then I had some fertility treatment. So I was put onto Clomid, and I had my daughter. And then I had one very, very early loss in between my daughter and my son, which was unexpected because it wasn't actually a planned pregnancy. And then I had my son. So my experience is slightly sort of, I suppose, from a recurrent miscarriage point of view. And I am 38 and I live in Abingdon with my husband. So if I can open up the conversation, Steph, it was quite interesting what you said, because you said that you knew nothing at all about miscarriage when it happened.
Yeah, so I was really surprised because nobody speaks about it. So I really knew nothing. And I came from it from a very naive point of view that I just thought miscarriage was health related. And stupidly, I thought I've been really healthy all my life. I've never been to the hospital for anything. Why would it happen to me? It's not going to happen to me. I'm a partner. And yeah, and then now, as soon as it did happen, when we started to speak, suddenly so many people, I would say the vast majority of people we told had a story themselves or a close family member or friend did. And it just dawned on me that actually this is really normal and really common. And I didn't really understand why the doctors and nurses didn't tell me about it, because actually it's 1 in 4, which is a really high number. So yeah, I mean, I think I felt a bit naive because we told everybody and made it wide, but that was also a good thing in the end, because it was the feedback from those people who made me aware of just how common it was. That was actually the reassuring thing and kind of helped us over it, really. But yeah, it's just one of these subjects that people don't talk about, don't like to talk about, change the subject when it comes up a little bit. And yeah, I'm not sure if I understand why, but is that was the right thing to do?
It's interesting you said about change the subject, because Jess, I don't know if you found, how have you been quite public about your later miscarriage?
I mean, it's harder to disguise, really. Like, even if I wanted to keep it a secret, when you're 17 weeks along, everybody knows, at least everybody who you're close to. So it wasn't something that I was I feel like I had to probably tell more people than I would have had it been an earlier miscarriage. But I think it really depended on who I was speaking to. So if I was speaking to people, obviously, who I knew had been there before, then they didn't want to change the subject. They wanted to talk about it with me because they knew that that was helpful for them, and it was definitely helpful for me. It was, I found more, I was surprised by some of the people who clearly didn't know what to say, and that wasn't their fault, but it was often people who didn't have any children themselves and didn't, if they did, then they hadn't been through that experience themselves and things like that. So they would either change the subject or would say something sort of, I don't know, flippant about, you know, everything happens for a reason, which I think is a bunch of BS, but that sort of stuff. So yeah, I guess for me, the not talking about it really depended on the audience.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because I know I sort of grew up, I suppose, with miscarriage in my life, because my mum had a miscarriage in between my brother and I just before she had me. And I know she's always very, I mean, the attitude towards miscarriage in the 80s was so different, because it was very, well, it wasn't, her words I can remember were sort of, you know, it wasn't really a baby. And I think that was because you just had no support in those days. So that was your kind of protection almost, was sort of not thinking of it as a baby. Whereas, I mean, I don't know about all of the rest of you, you know, especially Louise with your little embryos, you know, I always thought of them as babies. You know, they might not have been babies yet, but they were potential babies.
So my mum also had a miscarriage between my older brother and me. And I don't remember when she first told me that, but I really clearly remember that. But I remember what she said about it was that she was told, I can't remember quite when she found out, but she was 12 weeks-ish. But that it obviously hadn't been growing for a long time. So she was kind of given this impression like it hadn't really been there. But I remember her saying to me, but I had felt pregnant for 12 weeks. So to me, it's interesting because that, I think my mum's miscarriage was my first experience of hearing about it. And she was very clear on the idea that to her, it felt like she had a baby. So I guess maybe that stayed with me and helped me somehow understand for other people, even her just saying that. And also that she said that she was very much left on her own without anyone to talk to, and actually she wanted somebody to talk to. So I think it's interesting because even just having had one person like my mum tell me that changes how you then approach things, doesn't it? And I really hope that like things like this, if we can just tell a few people, no, actually people want to talk about their babies. Hopefully that can kind of change how everyone deals with it. I suppose for me it's interesting, isn't it, because I had there's a whole, you know, IVF and fertility treatment is like a whole other roller coaster of experience. So I'm trying to kind of leave that because you could do a whole hour just talking about that. But it's an interesting one because obviously when I had IUIs, which is artificial insemination, you don't know whether you've created an embryo. You don't know. So you've still got that roller coaster of fertility treatment. But when you then have full IVF, and so then you know that there are some embryos waiting and they're going to go back in your body, that's an embryo. So that's immediately, to me, a baby.
Yeah.
Potential for a baby. And then I think you get into that feeling of, I'm now looking after this thing. So then when you do your 2-week pregnancy test, you wait 14 days and then do a test, and then you're not pregnant. You have that feeling of like, well, that was alive when it went inside. So, and now it's not alive. And I hadn't really thought, and I had all of those feelings of loss completely. And I think that's what made me realise when I've been speaking to Claire and other people about baby loss. Like, oh, yeah, I know that feeling. And it's very different, but the feelings are the same, really, I think. And I think it also feeds into that idea of, could my body have done something different? Could I have done something different? Did I eat the wrong things? Did I do the wrong things? All of these, you know, that you hear people, you know, talk about. And obviously if a friend asks me those, I'm like, no, it's not, it's none of those things. And I often have people ask me now, oh, I've got a friend starting IVF, what tips could you give them? You know, have you got any books on diet and blah, 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 and all these things? And I think that's so hard because all it's doing is putting the onus on that person. Like, if you eat this way, you'll have success. If you do this, you will have been the person who's made this work. And it just loads the idea that then you're the person who's made it not work.
Yeah.
So all of that same thing, I think, feeds in, particularly around, I think also recurrent miscarriage, miscarriage. People have that same idea of, well, this time, if I eat right, if I really look after myself, I must get enough sleep, I must do all of these things. It's just loading on the pressure of you being in control of it somehow. And actually, the whole point of it, you're not in control of it. Just the same way I was not in control of when I had embryos put back in, then making it.
I think it's the same. It's the same thing with infertility, isn't it? Because I know sometimes infertility, or shall we say, when it's taking longer to conceive. So, Steph, we were quite lucky with our miscarriages because we got pregnant quite quickly after. I mean, I think I was pregnant 4 times in 7 months, but that came after a year of nothing. And the frustration then, when you lose that baby, and that sense of, so ridiculous, but that sense of personal failure, like I have failed, I've failed to conceive, and now I have failed to keep this baby, which is absolutely bogus because you haven't failed at all. But that is almost, I think, how we as I suppose when I say women, I mean it's sort of loosely in the kind of gender role of being female. That is how we're kind of almost bred to feel. Back in the day, you were a failure if you didn't produce children, or if you didn't produce a boy. And that's been kind of almost ingrained in us for hundreds of years. You think of all of the queens of England, for example. You think of Queen Anne, who lost baby after baby after baby. You think of Catherine of Aragon, who lost baby after baby. For the love of God, Anne Boleyn was burned basically because she couldn't produce another baby. And you just think all of this is drummed into us day after day after day, that somehow, this is our fault, and it just isn't. I don't know if anyone wants to sort of interject there.
Can I make, I guess, just sort of adding on to what you've both been saying about, the guilt that you automatically feel. You feel like, well, what did I do? It must have been something that I do. I mean, I spent weeks researching diet and looking for some sort of obscure nutrient that I had obviously been missing this whole time. And, despite taking prenatal vitamins and what have you, I did a full nutrition panel to make sure that I wasn't deficient in anything, and everything came back that I was completely fine and normal and whatnot. But I just remember obsessing about it. And the other thing that I would point out is that for me, between my 2 first pregnancies, my first pregnancy, I was way less healthy than I was in my second pregnancy. In my second pregnancy, I started off 20 to 25 pounds lighter. I was a bit overweight in my first pregnancy, and I ate way healthier. I went off caffeine straight away. I did all of those things that supposedly link to miscarriage. I was taking care and making sure that I wasn't doing them. I still had this result. And really the only difference is that I was 3 years older. I can't control for that. I can't, there's nothing I can do about that, and that's not, I'm not saying that that's the reason either, but I guess the point that I'm making is that, I have evidence that I was way, way healthier in the second pregnancy than I was first, yet it was the second pregnancy that I lost, not the first. So all of the signs point to, there's actually, it has nothing to do with you. It's not your fault. It's nothing that you did wrong, but you still in the back of your mind find ways to blame yourself.
Yeah, well, that's actually really reassuring for me to hear, because I'm kind of in that period where our loss was in November, and that was probably after 18 months of stopping contraception, maybe a year of properly monitoring it and trying, and we're still on the journey to a pregnancy, and I'm in that phase now where I'm thinking, right, what can I do with my lifestyle? Massively cut out drinking, massively caffeine. But the thing that's upsetting me more than that, because I do know that part of it's a roll of the dice, is if I want to do IVF, I initially thought my BMI had to be under 25, which would mean losing 3 stone. I understand now privately it's 30, which is 1.5 stone. I had a breakdown one day thinking, God, if I want to have a baby, I'm going to have to kill myself for 6 months, because I'm very short, so that's my problem. I'm really not that overweight to look at, but I'm just really short in stature. I'm just like, well, this just feels cruel, like I'm being punished for not being healthy enough, and somebody's putting a rule on me saying, you're not healthy enough to have a baby, you're just going to have to, you know, prove to us by losing all this weight and being so perfect. And yeah,
I find that so difficult, because obviously with IVF, I've looked at it, and I support people through fertility journey now as a doula, and the most important thing is that you are generally in a good emotional place as you can be, with support around you. That really is. And so the idea of having to put yourself through the ringer to like lose a load of weight beforehand is just madness. I find that really challenging, and I think it's also challenging, certainly when you start IVF. I mean, it is quite stark when they basically put you into categories of like success rates by your age, and that's, and when you look at it, you're like, okay, yeah, fair enough. I understand that is true, because I can't actually remember the stats off the top of my head. I used to have them all there, and then I was like, oh, it's a lot to keep thinking about. But by a certain age, there's a big chunk of your eggs each time that will have a chromosomal deformity, and so therefore that's why the risk of it, and that's why the chance of it not working, or your increased chance of miscarriage, that's why it happens. Because the older you get, the less healthy in theory your eggs are. But that's also not everybody. It's not blanket. It's not like, the success rates on that chart are like 34, if you're under 34, pretty good. Over 34, oh dear, and it's just like so blanket. I mean, it's like the BMI thing. It's nonsense, absolute nonsense, isn't it? But I think that is very hard then when you get into, and it's part of the thing of when you get into a medicalized system for anything really, like recurrent miscarriage must be a bit the same.
To get into the recurrent miscarriage clinic, it's different now. So we were very lucky before we had fits, because as soon as I had that miscarriage, I rang up and asked for a referral, and we saw Ingrid Gran, who's amazing in Oxfordshire. She's just a lovely person to go and see. She saw us straight away. Whereas when we had the third miscarriage, and that was the most horrendous one of all of them. I can remember, because my Rich was away in America, and I can remember having the great mistake of having a bath, and that was just dreadful. And then I got out the bath crying, and I rang my parents, and my dad was on the phone crying and going, "We need to come to you." And I was like, "I just want to be alone in my nest," because that's where I wanted to be. I just wanted to ball up on the sofa with a duvet over my head crying. That was where I personally wanted to be. I didn't want to have anyone else around me but Rich, and obviously he wasn't there, so I just had to deal with it on my own. But after that, I can remember thinking, oh, great, we're going to go and see the recurrent miscarriage clinic. And the wait was 6 months. And I remember thinking, we're going to have lost like 3 babies in that time, like, at the rate that we're going. So, and I didn't want to stop getting pregnant, because we were finally getting pregnant after that year of trying. And in the end, I went private, and I went to go and see, I was very lucky, I got it through my work health insurance, because it was a pre-existing, it was because it wasn't fertility, it was a medical condition by that point, apparently. This is sort of, I don't know whether they should have put me through. And I went to go see an amazing specialist, and he was actually very sympathetic. He was very he didn't look at me as a number. He sort of did all of the medical kind of bits and bobs that he needed to do, but he very much looked at Rich and I as people. And I think that was quite reassuring. And then when we saw Ingrid again, she was the same. She was very sort of, right, let's look at your circumstances, let's look at your history. Okay, I think what we're going to do is this is our pathway. The main thing to do is to be as positive as possible. And that's what both of them said, was positivity. Like there haven't been enough peer-reviewed studies, but there have been a couple of studies done on positivity in pregnancy.
But I found with the fertility treatment that it wasn't. I just think that I think it's hard when you start to look around fertility, and I was wondering whether it's the same with miscarriage, in that you become categorized. You can't help it. And if you look at the statistics, because all of the papers, all the statistics are like categorize you into age and like BMI, and it becomes a bit stark, and I remember, and so I'm not sure, I'm not sure that the care was like that. But when you're in that frame of mind and you're thinking, well, look at the rate of this, oh dear, you know, it can seem quite stark from that point of view. And I think that's hard, and I think that's why it really, you know, maybe it's linked in with this positivity thing, but I really think that what you need to put in place is your support network. About, you know, if you're having and it's hard because if you haven't had a miscarriage before, you haven't had something before, you don't know that, and then you're just suddenly in it. It's kind of almost easier when you've had a couple of tries, you know, when you know what it's like. Also, a friend has said to you something, because I really believe that support around fertility treatment, early pregnancy, it's just not there. I mean, you know, if you think about it, so many people have terrible sickness early pregnancy, and we're just like dragging ourselves to work, dragging ourselves through this. You know, we are kind of built to just be like, must just get on. You know, we've done it every month, haven't we? Painful periods. I've had periods where I've had, like, my uterus has been contracting. I've been like crawling on the floor, and I'm still like, got to get to work. You know, every month we're expected, whatever our situation is, to be like, carry on with life. We mustn't speak about this. It's like, you know, something that in society, you're not going to just say at work, I can't come in because I've got my period. Whereas there are legitimately days when that would be a reason not to go to work. So I think there is this level of ingrained carrying on.
Wasn't it the old you're not sick, you're pregnant? That's
yeah, it's not a sickness, it's a pregnancy, and that's, you know, and that's true, but it doesn't mean that you might have symptoms that are difficult to deal with. There's somebody I came across with my fertility treatment wholeheartedly believed, and was in the press quite a lot, saying that all women should have a set number of days a year that are used as days off to do around menstruation and fertility, and that should just be a given. But I mean, that's never going to happen, is it? But I'm just, you know, it's none of it's helping, is it? None of it is then helping the taboo and the idea of like, oh, there's something happening over there, but let's not look at it because it's making us uncomfortable.
What were your attitudes from work, everyone, can I ask? Just to sort of ask, you know, how did you tell your work that it was happening? Did you tell clients if you're self-employed? Like, how did you find that sort of aspect of things?
As in telling them about the miscarriage or about the pregnancy?
The miscarriage.
Yeah. Well, I guess for me, I was in a pretty fortunate position in that the two ladies that I work with, one of them herself had 2 miscarriages before, so she was obviously extremely sympathetic and has been throughout, you know, the entire process. You know, they didn't obviously expect me back to work straight away or anything like that. I think in the end, I took a week and a half or so off. I probably could have taken more because I don't think I was actually ready to go back, especially sort of, I don't know, having the loss as late as I did. But when I did go back as well, like the sort of pressure was eased a bit. You know, I wasn't expected to really do significant, meaningful work for a good couple weeks there. And, you know, they regularly checked in with me and things like that. And I talked completely openly about the whole thing, especially because Sarah, my boss, had been there before as well. So that, you know, we had a good talking point to start from, really. Okay. So I guess, yeah, for me, I was fortunate that I was in a position where I could feel comfortable with it.
Yeah. So I remember telling my boss, and she was amazing, actually. I remember telling her the 3rd one's happening, and she was just like, why the hell are you here? Go home, take as long as you need. That's nice. So, I mean, Steph, you're self-employed, so what was this?
Yeah, I actually chose to tell everybody, all my clients and the clinic where I work. I'm a hypnotherapist and other therapies, and I'm so glad I did, because that's what led to my support network. I wouldn't have known where my support network was hadn't I have just said, I'm really sorry, I'm out of action for 2 weeks, this has happened. Other therapists out the blue came. My hairdresser was one of the best sources of support. I had no idea that she'd been through it. And yeah, everybody was really sympathetic, everybody was really lovely. There was an element of when they saw me again, a bit like, oh, should we talk about it, shall we not? And I just kind of reassured them, and, you know, I'm still me, but just carry on, it's fine, thank you for being patient with me. And yeah, I think it was the best thing I did, actually. I mean, in a way we didn't have a choice because we told most people we were pregnant, but it opened up opportunities for support that I didn't know were there.
Okay, and how about you, Louise?
It's a tricky one, isn't it, fertility treatment, I think, because it's a strange thing to, I think it's always challenging to know what the best route is for that, to tell people, because it's tricky in work as well, isn't it? Because it depends on people's attitude to work, and where if you're on short-term contracts and all kinds of things, there's quite a lot of impact. So I was comfortable telling some of my colleagues, but didn't tell anybody in like an official capacity. But the same reason, I also didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell many people that I was pregnant until quite late. 17 weeks, I think, 16 or 17 weeks.
So I guess what I wanted to sort of go from here was asking everybody what their sort of experiences were like, because I know sometimes it can be quite, if, for example, someone's watching this because they've got a friend or relative who's going through it, that can be very helpful. And then, of course, I think all of us have had quite different experiences. So, Steph, can I start with you?
Yeah. So mine happened at the 8-week marks, and it actually happened when I was giving a massage, which was super awkward.
Oh.
And I kind of felt the urge to go to the loo, and went to the loo, and obviously there was blood there. And we were in denial to begin with, because we know that in pregnancy you can have bleeding, and that's quite normal. So we sort of said, let's just see if it gets any worse as the night goes on. I remember I ordered myself a great big pizza from Prezzo to make myself feel better, because I was anxious and worried. And it was a Friday. So we rang Rose Hill, and eventually, which is the, I can't remember the proper name of it, but it's
Maternity assessment.
Yeah. And they said, well, we're actually not here at the moment, so if it continues and you think that it is a miscarriage that's happening, you need to go to A&E. So we had a very long night for 4 hours, sat in A&E in pain, and obviously the contraction feeling going on, only for a very lovely but stressed out A&E nurse to kind of whip me behind a curtain, do the examination, say, yes, I'm very sorry. And, you know, I kind of went home. It was a very long, horrible night, and decided to ride it out, and kind of ride it out naturally, really, because you get the options, don't you, what you can do. So yeah, it was all quite a sudden sort of scenario, really. But one of the things I do regret is I wanted to allow it to happen naturally and come out of my body. But then about 3 months later in the bath, I had a clump of tissue come out of my body, which I feel was probably from that pregnancy. They said they couldn't confirm or say exactly what it was when I went for the scan the next day. But I kind of wish that I had sort of started with a fresh sheet, let's put it that way. Because I always wondered if that kind of stopped my fertility journey for those few months while my body was fully releasing it. So yeah, sorry, never a pleasant story, is it?
I'm so sorry to hear that. I have a practical question with my head on, thinking, how did you know to ring the early pregnancy unit? Because I'm just thinking back, would I have known to do that? I'm just thinking about for other people. How did you know to ring the early pregnancy?
I think we'd had our midwife appointment, and she had given us the number, said if you can't get in touch with hers as any emergencies, ring this number.
Okay.
And they were out of office, so yeah, so I went that way.
They're giving it out. Yeah, it's something that I think I've heard time and time again, that A&E journey, and it's really not. It's not the right place, is it? I know I know it's what's provided.
Yeah, and on a Friday night, you've got all the drunkards who's been in fights kind of sat all around you, you know, and you sat there thinking, yeah, please see me. I can't tell you which one it is.
And it's so difficult because the A&E becomes like, it feels like a priority situation. I can only imagine how that feels sat there, because obviously they see people kind of in priority, and that's just not the situation you want to be in. Sitting there thinking, well, how important is this? Because it is really important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I used to do training, funnily enough, over in Swindon Hospital, and it was through the Miscarriage Association, and I used to go in with all the 3rd and 4th year medics. And it was great because they'd come in and they'd use all those words like tissue and you're shedding tissue and product. That was the brilliant one. And you had to sort of say to them, oh guys, it's not product, that is someone's baby. It doesn't matter whether they knew about the pregnancy, it doesn't matter whether they just found out or whether this is the most love. You have no idea. You've got to refer to it, you cannot refer to it as product, you've got to refer to it as with respect and dignity. And they were all lovely because they were all very like, I never thought of that before, because for them it was just it was medical.
I'm glad you said that, because actually, well, on the phone before they told me to go to A&E, they kept asking me that question: is it tissue or is it just blood? Is it tissue? And I didn't actually know. Like, I didn't have the scientific knowledge to understand what they meant. And I sort of tried to describe, well, it's like clots, it's like this, it's like that, but is it? And I was getting frustrated, thinking, whatever language you're using, I actually just don't understand. Like, you're gonna have to put it in layman's terms for me. So yeah, it's interesting you said that.
Yeah, it's I mean, Jess, your experience, obviously, sort of Steph's was at 8 weeks, because yours was at 17 weeks, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I guess, as I mentioned before, it was my second pregnancy. So first pregnancy was completely uncomplicated. The birth was completely uncomplicated. So sort of, I was feeling quite confident going into my second pregnancy. I got pregnant again, as I said, at the start of this year. So I was around 7 or 8 weeks along when the country went into lockdown. So this meant, I guess this had a lot of sort of knock-on consequences. So for example, at my 12-week scan, Tim wasn't able to attend with me. I was told at my 12-week scan, everything looked perfect. She had no concerns whatsoever. So, you leave your 12-week appointment, like most women do, feeling like you're in the clear. Nothing can happen now. And so that's why it came as a complete shock, 5 weeks later, when what happened. So it started off with just a tiny amount of bleeding. It was such an insignificant amount and of a color that wasn't particularly suspicious that I wasn't very worried. But I rang the midwife anyway. And she also wasn't worried, but said, come in, we can check the heartbeat and just make sure that everything's on track. So that's what we decided to do. We had to go all the way to Wantage, which is around 25 minutes away, because they closed the Abingdon midwife clinic due to COVID. We also had to take our 2-year-old with us because we had 0 childcare options at that time. Tim also still wasn't able to go in with me for listening into the heartbeat, so they had to stay out in the car. So the first midwife came and she couldn't find the heartbeat. Told me not to panic because this happens all the time, and I know that it does happen all the time. Another midwife came who also couldn't find the heartbeat, so then they referred us to the JR to have a scan. So at this point, we decided to drop Toby off at Tim's parents' house, even though they technically weren't allowed to sort of see him yet at that point because the country was in lockdown, but we didn't feel like we had any other choice. And so we went to the JR. Again, Tim had to wait in the car. So I went in, another midwife tried to find the heartbeat and couldn't. So at this point, I was getting very concerned. And then the doctor came in with the scanner, which is much more accurate than the Doppler. And within 5 seconds, you know that it's not good news because nobody's saying anything. Nobody has an expression on their face. So it was only at this point that I was allowed to call Tim to tell him that he could come inside and be with me. So they gave us a little bit of time to sort of absorb what had happened. And then the doctor came in to run through the options with us. So basically the only option that you have when you are 17 weeks along is to give birth. And I didn't know that, but really that's kind of what you have to do. So you start the process at the hospital by taking a pill that separates the placenta from the uterine lining. You then have to go back 2 days later, and they insert pills vaginally every 3 hours until you give birth, which can take up to 24 hours. And to be honest, I wasn't expecting it to be quite as birth-like as it actually was. You do get contractions. They aren't quite as painful as they are with a full-term birth, but they're still quite uncomfortable. My waters also broke, which I wasn't expecting to happen. And fortunately, I guess the one sort of good thing is that they'll give you as strong of painkillers as you ask for, because there's no harm to the baby. So I was on morphine, which was quite nice because I was quite chirpy under the circumstances. I only wish that they could have given it to my husband as well, but they couldn't. So it was around the 4-hour point that I got up to do what I thought was going to be a wee. And I went into the bathroom. They had a bedpan in, and the baby just came. So the midwife then came in and took the baby away and cleaned her up. We now know that it's a she. And so we had to make a decision about whether or not we'd like to see the baby. So I was a bit hesitant about this at first, because I didn't know that I wanted to have that sort of image seared into my brain. But it was really important for Tim to be able to see the baby, because he basically had been repeatedly denied the opportunities to see the baby throughout this entire time. So it was really his one chance to bond with her. Sorry, I know I didn't mean to make everybody cry, including myself. Yeah, so in the end, I am glad that we opted to see her. We also then decided we had to make sort of decisions on funeral arrangements. We had to make decisions on how much investigating we wanted them to do into why this happened. So we opted for a hospital burial, which they do monthly for all of the unborn babies at the JR. And we also asked for a full postmortem. So we were told with the postmortem that it can take 11 to 14 weeks for the results to come back. And in the end, it did take basically the full 3 months, which felt like a painfully long time to wait for answers, especially because I got pregnant again in the meantime. Which, sort of makes you wonder, is there something that they're going to tell me that's going to compromise this pregnancy? They didn't find any answers in the end. They basically, everything indicated that the baby was completely healthy, that I was completely healthy, and that the baby had been, progressing normally up until the point that it suddenly wasn't, and there wasn't any explanation as to why that was, which was really frustrating. But we were also told that it was the best result that we could hope for in terms of having a future successful pregnancy. So in some ways, I suppose it was reassuring. Additionally, because of COVID, we were almost unable to attend the hospital burial, but fortunately Claire and I believe Louise came to my rescue, and I don't know what you said, but you convinced them otherwise. So I had a call.
She was amazing. Hayley, really.
Yeah, Hayley.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
Hayley, our co-chair, came and really sorted that out. I didn't realise that was you.
Yeah.
But we remember Claire sharing that with us, and we were like, "This is not okay."
And do you know what? It didn't
very
even
rageful terms.
It didn't even occur to me that I could question it, and I'm really glad that I shared that information now with Claire, so that you could get the right people together to convince them otherwise. Because at that point, the country was opening up again. It was ridiculous. I could go to the pub, but I can't say goodbye to my baby.
I think also one of the things to say here, alongside the fact of I think it's so amazing for you to share this very hard story for you to share, because I think it the more, if people can hear about experiences, then it can only help them. Some of the things that you've said there about not knowing that your waters would break, and really, maybe somebody else will.
And not knowing that the only option was going to be to give birth. I mean, I knew, and also not knowing that, frankly, that miscarriage was even possible in the second trimester. I knew the risks in the first trimester a bit, but then you get past that hurdle and you just feel like, okay, well, I'm good to go now. but that wasn't the case. It is still a small percentage. It's only something like 1%, but I was the 1%. So, you know, it can still happen. And yeah, you know, I guess when you're in that moment, you know, you've just had this news come from the doctor telling you that your baby's gone, and then literally like 15 minutes later you're talking about giving birth, and it's just not the conversation you were prepared to have in that moment. So knowing some of that information up front would have actually been really helpful.
Yeah, I hear you about that, and I think that is interesting, isn't it, that none of that is shared and that you just don't know. And you sharing that letter about the memorial service with Claire, I mean, I think anyone who would have read that and seen that you couldn't go would have thought, this is awful. But I think also because it hit Hayley's radar, and Hayley has had an experience and been to a memorial service and knows the lifelong impact that could have of not having that opportunity. She, you know, she has had the experience, and so she just knew this cannot happen. And so I'm not quite sure where I'm going with that, but there is something about the fact of like spreading the word. Like, people need to know these things. They need to not be hidden, because if people know them, then they can support more, they can understand more. And yeah, and there is a shared network out there, you know, unknowingly. You shared that with Claire, who has her own experience, but Hayley had an experience that matched yours to some, you know, in some ways, and so was therefore had been through it and has drawn strength from that, and had the fuel behind her to say, you know, almost like, I'm not going to let this happen to somebody else. I mean, you know, to somebody, knowing how important it was.
About it, isn't it? That is the key to so much. And I'm not saying that people have to, because there are some people out there who will not want to talk about it, and that is absolutely bloody fine. But there are also a lot of people who will feel that they can't, you know, that, and it is, baby loss in general, especially later term losses, are, people like to talk about nice things, you know, they like to talk about, I mean, I find later term miscarriage and stillbirth incredibly hard to talk about, and you know, I'm the person who, when I watched that horrible episode of The Witcher with the baby, got furious at the producers for not putting a warning at the beginning, because that's not what you want, that's not what I want to see. I do not want to see that on my television. That is not something that I personally can deal with. And I find it incredibly difficult. I think I've had this conversation with you and Hayley, haven't I, Louise? I find it incredibly difficult to look at images that people have shared on social media, because for me it triggers, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't share it. That's my problem to deal with it. They are being incredibly honest. Recently, didn't we had, I can never pronounce her name. Is it Chrissy Tame? It's the model who's just recently lost her pregnancy.
Yes.
And she had the bravery of sharing that is just incredible, you know. But at the same time, people shouldn't feel that if they don't want to share that and they want to keep it private, they should feel that they have that option as well.
But I also thought it's interesting, because there were a couple of in some of the reporting about that, there were a couple of places where it kind of used the word miscarriage. I think most of them said loss, but there were a couple of places. And then of course there's a picture of her holding a baby. And to me, like, you know, I think it's so difficult. The terminology is so difficult, right? And I think this is why some of the things Sarah talks about not knowing about or hearing about is because everyone's kind of heard miscarriage somewhere along there, and maybe they've kind of heard stillbirth but haven't really thought what that means. They think more about the fact of like, oh, baby's coming at the time you'd expect, but it's born and it's not alive. And I think those two things are awful, but are somewhere in the realm of heard about. And then there's this other area that just isn't on anyone's radar, as you say, and people don't think about the fact that what that actually looks like. And as you say, Claire, I know you know some people won't want to go there, but I think in some ways it's a useful, you know, I'm always feel glad is the wrong word, but when that story came out about Chrissy Tame, and I was like, well, this is amazing that she shared it in that way, because it not only prepares people to have it somewhere in there, you know, not that they're preparing that would happen to them, but it's somewhere there. And I think also for people like Sarah who've lived it, thinking, yeah, this is not, it doesn't have to be hidden if I don't want it to be. It's a thing.
Yeah, that was very much my instincts. I mean, I know I was earlier along, but I found myself telling friends and family the gory details, not for them to feel sorry for me, but especially my friends my age who were thinking of having children. Like, you need to know this. Like, I know you don't want to hear it, but you need to know it. And for me, I found forums and YouTubes massively helpful. Just reading other women talking about their experience wholly and completely, and just getting that out there. And that was a fantastic resource for me. It's not on any government website, it was just sort of there with the people sharing their stories, and such as we're doing today. You know, it's just so reassuring to hear, actually, this is what happens, and it's okay, and that's the steps, when there isn't really much telling you about that before it happens, really. It's kind of sad you have to find out about it afterwards, or as it happens. Yeah.
It was interesting sort of having had sort of three. I'm sorry, my son has just decided that he wants lunch, so I'm just going to do this like this. It was interesting sort of having the three, because I had those kinds of it's awful to say comparisons between the miscarriages, because all three were so different, but my attitude sort of changed, because Hayley is going to talk about parenting after loss, but the innocence, I think, is just, it's not there anymore when you get pregnant again. I mean, I can remember subsequent pregnancies, like the first one was, oh my God, the second one was like, right. The third one was like, oh, right, all right, yeah, whatever. And by the time I had my daughter, it was so depressing. I just remember saying to my husband, he had friends out in the garden when I got pregnant with Artemis, which was number 4. And this was when we had like the whole, you know, sort of arsenal of you know, progesterone, and you know, I'd been on a Clomid cycle before and then had lost that baby, but then Clomid has a half cycle, so I hadn't taken any the month after. And I can remember sort of, you know, my husband had friends out in the garden. I remember just calling up to him. It was really early. It was like 7 days or 8 days past ovulation, because they wanted to put me on the progesterone really early. I just said, oh, it's happened again. And he was like, right, okay. And then like every week, you know, that sort of feeling of, oh, what's up with you? That feeling of, you know, I mean, it never goes away, because my pregnancy with my son, I was checking my underwear every time I went to the toilet until he was born. Like, I kid you not, or possibly until I got to, oh, what's up with you? And possibly until I got to maybe when he could survive outside. So maybe sort of more like 35, 36 weeks. That's when I relaxed a bit. But that never goes away. You never have an innocent pregnancy. There is constantly that fear. I don't know if everyone else feels the same. I'm just going to mute this. Hang on.
I mean, that's very, very much where I'm at the moment. I mentioned that I'm pregnant again, which I'm happy about and I'm relieved about, but to say that I'm excited is not true at all. I don't really have any expectations. I can't really look forward to it. It's being pregnant after having a miscarriage, like we've all had, basically means that you worry a little bit every time you go to the bathroom. It means that I guess I had some bad headaches and things like that when immediately before miscarrying, and when I have a headache now, I start to panic. It means that I can't actually talk about my baby in the present tense. I talk about it in this sort of weird hypothetical tense. So when people say, what's your due date? I don't say it's the 18th of April. I say it would be the 18th of April, because it's just a weird thing to say. But like my mouth won't allow me to form the words it is, because to me right now, it isn't yet. It's not real yet. It won't be real until I think that baby is actually in my arms. I'm hoping, that once I get past around 20 weeks or so, when I have a little bit of distance between when the last miscarriage happened, then I'm hoping that I'll start to be able to relax a little bit and enjoy the pregnancy more, but I'm not really confident about that. So I expect it to be similar to what Claire was saying, maybe once I get to that 35-week stage, I'll start to feel like, okay, well, if the baby was born now, it could survive outside of the womb. So, hopefully hopefully I'll calm down a bit. But yeah, I mean, it's just a strange place to be.
It is, and it's so hard, isn't it? Because with if it was say your first pregnancy, it's hard, isn't it? Because we're all sat here saying people should know, people should be a bit prepared, or they should kind of know where to get support, and they should. But it's so difficult to get that balance, isn't it, between well, if someone's going through their pregnancy and everything's fine, do you leave them in that innocent bubble? Like, it's such a trick. I mean, I don't think there's a good answer, is there? I think it's very hard to know how to make sure there's support there, so if people know about it. But it's almost like that thing of, if people don't really know they need to know about it, then they won't know it's there. I think it's
I have a really mixed feeling about the huge amounts of miscarriage information, because on one level I think it's so important that we talk about it, and on the other I think that it does cause a lot of anxiety for women in early pregnancy, which I think I don't know how you get around it, because you have to educate people, but at the same time people need to use that education and they need to apply it to their situation, and they need to go, look, actually it is common, 1 in 4, but once you've got past, there's a really good website online actually that I can really recommend, which is what are the chances of my pregnancy being okay, rather than saying what are my chances of losing the baby, saying what are my chances of my pregnancy being okay. And every week you check in, it gets better and better and better, and it's got a really positive slant in it. And I think that's kind of the way that we almost need to view it. It needs to be, okay, we need to go into this assuming everything will be okay, but knowing that there is a chance it won't be, not assuming it will go wrong.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And that's me talking after 4 miscarriages. I think it is a lot hard. It's easier for me to say because they were early miscarriages. I don't know how I would have felt had they been a lot of later term miscarriages or stillbirths. Maybe I would look at it differently. But
I think it's interesting, because a lot of people I talk to about loss, their real pinpoint of anxiety is what happened last time.
Yeah.
So obviously for me, mine was so early on. Yes, I had all the fertility bit, and then there's the embryos. And actually for me, all of the medicalized stuff happening to my body was before that. So actually nothing really happened when my embryo was lost. It wasn't a big thing to my body. Lots of the stuff that was big was the treatment. And of course, so that stage was in the treatment journey, but in the pregnancy, well, I'd never got to that stage before. Whereas I think when you have a later term thing, and it's a bit like, with neonatal death, it's a bit the same thing. Everyone has the point of like, if we can just get past where it was last time, it'll be all right. And that's a long time. 17 weeks is a long time, isn't it? And I mean, I just don't, it's one of those things where it's kind of like, yeah, it is just hard. It is just hard. Obviously you can try and do everything you can as a friend and family to help anyone. And Claire and I are obviously trying to help the service to support better. But it's so difficult to get away from, I think, that marker of, of if we can just get past where I was before. I don't know the way around that.
I think that's accurate. I mean, for me, that certainly is how it feels, is if I can get past that point, then hopefully I'll have enough distance from it that I'll start to feel a bit more confident and things like that. The statistics, I know that they're reassuring for most people. For me, unfortunately, they're not as reassuring as I would like, because of what happened when it happened for me. So even, having my 12-week scan a couple of days ago, again, everything was perfectly fine in it. But it didn't give me much reassurance, just because of when things happened for me. So in some ways, I guess, well, I do find the statistics reassuring. It's also not very reassuring to me to be that 1%, that sort of minority. And then it makes me feel like, well, the next time it must be a higher percentage because I've had it happen before or something. And I don't mean to put a massively pessimistic view on it, because I'm not actually that pessimistic about it. I'm not going around saying I'm going to have another miscarriage, but I'm just aware that it could happen again. And that's, I think, why I can't allow myself to sort of just have confidence that everything is going to be okay this time. You know, and I suppose, you know, assuming that everything is okay, once I'm on the other side of it, then I might change my views again. But I suppose living in the middle of it right now makes it a little bit difficult for me to do that. Yeah, I don't really know where else I'm going with that, but I think for me, late October, so later this month, is going to be the hardest time, because that's when I'm going to be getting to that point of 15, 16, 17 weeks with this pregnancy. But also that's when my last pregnancy would have been due. So I've got this sort of double whammy of having a lot of grief to deal with there, in addition to the nerves and anxiety surrounding when things happened last time. So I think, like I said, like once I get past that point, I know that that's going to be the peak. So at least I know that I have a peak in sight of, and hopefully, you know, once I get past that, then I can start to be a little bit more positive.
Can I ask how what did you all find useful? So if you were talking to somebody who has a loved one who's going through any of the experiences that we've talked about, what would you say is the best advice you can give to the people around them to do or to say? I won't say to not say, because I think there's, or to not say. What would you say are the best things to do?
For me, I think it's just talking about it. And not necessarily, I mean, I didn't have many conversations, fortunately, where I left feeling, you know, more upset about it than I was at the beginning of the conversation. So just talking about it and reaching out to people who, you know, have been there before and who've had similar experiences has massively helped me. And I think one of the people, I mean, I reached out to everybody, people who were minor acquaintances that I hadn't spoke to in a decade. I reached out to them because I knew that they had a miscarriage at one point. And one of them described it as sort of being the weirdest club in the world. It's like this sort of underground club that nobody knows exists until you go through this similar experience, and then suddenly people come out of the woodwork. You know, I don't think that it has to be underground. I don't think it should be underground, but it often is. But I think, yeah, just sharing those experiences has massively helped me.
Yeah, I think similarly, just allowing the space to talk about it, and they don't even have to understand it, but just, I know it sounds bad saying not showing the discomfort, but not trying to close the conversation down, I suppose I mean. Just being there and letting me speak and just holding that space to listen and be sympathetic. Like that's enough, really, just allowing the room to do that. Yeah.
For me, it's hard because I'm the queen of platitudes. Like, you know, I want to make it better for people when I talk to them, and sometimes you can't. And for me, it was just don't come out with all the trite platitudes, because it will inevitably be wrong. The biggest thing that you can say is, I am so sorry, what can I do? Yeah. And like, even if it's things like, if they're in the middle of it, like, for example, you know, Jess, if I had known that you were going through that at the time, probably what I would have done, and I know Rich would have really supported me and probably helping me do it, is to drop a cottage pie off on your doorstep. You know, just say, I'm really sorry, I've dropped you off dinner, you don't have to think about it, stick it in the fridge, eat it when you need it. Yeah. And I think it's little things like that. You know, I've had friends who I've sent flowers to. You don't have to do that, you might feel that's a bit much. The Miscarriage Association has cards now that you can send just saying, I'm so sorry, I'm thinking of you. You know, I think it's just, but not offering things like, oh, but it happened once, it'll happen again, and well, you know, it was so yeah.
You probably don't hear that as much here, but from my American friends, you hear that one a lot, and it really grinds me.
Yeah, something that and actually a distant acquaintance did for me, which was really moving, is they bought me a little aromatherapy roller that you put on your pulse points just to calm you down. and it was just in an envelope with a postcard saying, I know you need this right now. And yeah, like you were saying, Claire, the small gestures of kindness, yeah, really mean something actually. Yeah, people can't talk. Actually, the cottage pie on the doorstep, perfect.
Yeah.
I think the other thing around it is that to remember that whilst people may get distance from their experience, that will stay with them forever. So I think it's also about, I'm kind of conscious of it when I meet even older people, or, you know, things. It's something around the idea of, like, even if you then have kids afterwards and, you know, all of that stuff, that experience is so deeply rooted for that person that everyone has their own calendar of, you know, like I remember the exact dates when I took pregnancy tests after treatment and found out they were negative. Like I have the map of dates. Everyone will have their map of dates, of the dates of a miscarriage, the dates a baby was due, the dates are, you know, and that stays for a long time in people's minds. So there's just something around people being, I guess it's just allowing people and remembering that people will hold it with them forever, and it will become part of, it's part of them forever, that experience. So
oh, sorry, Luke. I know a really tricky one as well, isn't it? Is if, for example, you have a successful pregnancy when a friend is pregnant at the same time and has lost the baby. You know, Steph, I've always felt, because obviously I was pregnant with Fitz at a very similar time when you had your loss, and I've always felt very kind of, I always hoped that you talk about it, and I always hope that, you know, you would, but it would be completely natural for people to feel sort of funny about that. And I know I had a similar thing when I'd lost my baby. I can remember when I was at work and someone rang up, I worked in hospitality, and she said, oh, I'm going to need this because I'm pregnant. And I was like, oh, that's lovely. How far along are you? And she went 6 months. And I remember it just hitting me. I thought, I'd be 6 months too. And I remember just thinking, oh God, I had to go off and cry in the toilets, because, you know, that it just does hit you like that. But at the same time, it's just explaining to people, I am so happy for you. I am just really sad for myself right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I had friends who were similar, and from the opposite point of view, I kind of felt like saying to them, don't distance yourself from me. Don't think you can't speak to me. You know, I don't begrudge your journey at all. Just please don't think that's a reason not to be in my life right now, kind of thing. So yeah, I think it works both ways.
How do you feel the sort of coping with it afterwards? Do you feel that that loss is still very much with you, or do you feel that no, that was in the past, or sort of how are you feeling kind of after the fact?
Shall I start? Because I guess mine was like a really early loss, and to some people that may not feel like a loss, and it's very different. I think it is different in lots of ways, but with a similar theme. I think for me, what happened in that is that I went from, which I think many people will have, is the idea of, like, especially with fertility treatment, I had all the checks. They're like, everything's perfectly functioning. This should be quite straightforward. And then, of course, it wasn't at all. So then you get into that, like, whoa, okay, this might never happen. So then you make a plan in your head of like, okay, this might never happen. I might never get pregnant. I might never have a child. You go there in your mind. And so you therefore come into a pregnancy when it works with quite a different mindset, whatever that might be. Mine wasn't overly anxious about the pregnancy, but mine was with a huge, hefty load of gratitude and feeling like, well, this might be the only one ever. So that stays with you for sure, and throughout parenting that stays with you. But I think also because I had those other embryos, and I was like, oh, there are embryos, they didn't survive in my body. It has given me, to some extent, a connection with people who have lost babies at all that stage of pregnancy, of that idea of somehow their body letting them down or something happening. And I feel that connection, and I feel the lived experience that they share very deeply, I think, because I kind of had been there in my mind somehow.
Steph, obviously you're still, I hate it when people say you're still on your journey, because we're all on our journey. But you obviously, you had your miscarriage, and you're still trying for your baby. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, so I think I've overcome the kind of grief of it and the initial emotional impact of it. But it's definitely changed my belief. So I think before, it was a very innocent pregnancy, and I had the belief that, yeah, you're fertile, you're very healthy, no reason to believe you're not healthy. And it does knock you. It does knock that belief when it happens, and when you don't conceive again for, not quite a year yet, but kind of 10 months yet. So yeah, I am in that phase of, do I believe that my body can do this again? Now, am I too old now at 36? There's no reason to believe that. But yeah, trying to stay positive and kind of battle with the angel and the devil on the shoulder kind of thing. One saying, yeah, sure, it's really common, it happens to everyone. The other saying, oh, well, but everybody says something at this age, it's harder. That's kind of tough. But I think the other thing is just, something I was really pleased to be invited on this call for was, because it's 8 weeks, and that's in the first trimester is almost when, if it's going to happen, you expect that it happens. I almost feel like, is it too early a loss for people to take seriously? I know that sounds like a weird thing, but I lost quite early on and was quite naive about the process. And we actually named our baby, and we have a little glass angel in the living room that represents, because we're very spiritual people and we believe there was a soul there. But sometimes I feel like, should I hide that? Do people think I'm a bit ridiculous having a loss so early on, and actually seeing that as a child and seeing that as like an angel baby, as we would put it? So yeah, I think it does stick with you. I hope that I have a successful pregnancy, and it will be a step on the journey to that. But at this stage, I just don't know. I just don't know what the future will be.
See, I always think a loss is a loss. We had all of our losses early. And I know Louise, Hayley and I have always said that when the three of us worked together, we always said a loss is a loss. There are different grades of loss. But where you are in your circumstances will hugely impact your reactions. So if you're on your 6th round of IVF, and if you've been trying for 2 years, or if you've been trying for 10 years. I've had friends who literally have been trying for years and years and years, and then you have a miscarriage, even if it's at 5 weeks. My God, you work so hard for that baby. Then my experience is very, very different from Jess's experience, because she held her baby. I never held my babies. They were pieces, it sounds awful, but they were pieces of tissue down the toilet, and they were things floating in the bath. They weren't a solid baby that I could hold in my arms. And I can't imagine what that was like for you, Jess. I think we go into an almost very dangerous area where you sort of start to grade loss, because I think everyone's individual circumstance and everyone's individual sort of place where they are in their life when they have that loss is so different, and you never know how it will affect you. I've known people who have had post-traumatic stress disorder after a 6-week miscarriage. It doesn't make their experience any less valid, or their feelings, and I think that's wonderful that you named that baby and you have that memory of it. I often think about all the ones that we lost, and I think I'm glad that I have Artemis, and I'm glad that I have Fitz, but because that's what I know. But you do always sort of think of them. I think I'm more removed maybe now I've had my 2, and our journey with having children is over, but it doesn't mean that you don't forget. Jess, you obviously have a different experience.
Yeah, first I'd go back to what you were just saying about context, and I do think that context is really important in a loss. And although I did have my loss late at 17 weeks, my context was fairly gentle to me, in that I've already had one successful pregnancy before, which makes me grateful for having a baby already, but also it gives me hope for future pregnancies. I've also with that pregnancy, we had only been trying for a couple of months, whereas for the first pregnancy, it took nearly a year. So it wasn't as traumatic, I suppose. It was still obviously very traumatic, but because of all that context, because that, you know, my circumstances were easier than perhaps they would have been had that been in the first pregnancy, then it did make it a little bit easier to deal with. With regard to whether or not, you know, sort of where I'm at now and whether I've moved on, I wouldn't say that I'm quite there yet. I'm doing the best that we can. I've, you know, like I said, talking about it with people helps. We've been getting counseling sessions through a charity called Petals, which deals with miscarriage and stillbirth. So that helps as well, and we're still doing that currently. And I suppose it is just going to take time. I think one of the things that makes it difficult as well is knowing that the sex was a girl. And because our first baby was a boy, and because there's very, very few girls on either sides of our family, it just felt like an extra blow. And in some ways, it almost puts more pressure on the second pregnancy now, or this pregnancy now, to be a girl, because it feels like if it was a girl, then it might be easier to move on from that loss. But if it's not, then it might take a little bit more time. And that's not fair. It's not fair on me. It's not fair on the baby. But that's how it feels. And so, yeah, I mean, we're very much, I guess, a work in progress in terms of where we're at now, but we're headed in the right direction.
Counselling, I think, is really important, because I had some counselling. I realised very, very swiftly through an incredibly anxious pregnancy. I had a brief halcyon period between 20 and 30 weeks. I think I wasn't as anxious. But I did go for counselling before I decided to. Actually, it was when I was just pregnant with Fitz here. And that was really, really valuable, like really valuable. The counselling I found brilliant. I mean, it's very hard because there's just not enough funding, really, especially in sort of early miscarriage. And Steph, I don't know if you find this, but I think a lot of people are very like, oh, you've had one miscarriage, we'll deal with it when you get to 3. And you kind of feel like going, what? I have to go through this 2 more times before you're happy, you know. Oh, it's almost like normalized, you know, when you sort of talk to sort of a lot of kind of, you know, doctors and things like that. And I don't know, I just think counselling can be incredibly helpful.
So interestingly, I think you're right. I think the context and the counselling is interesting, because I know when we moved fertility clinics and we started our new one, we were kind of asked a question about, like, so why is it so important for you to have a child? And coming from a place of a same-sex couple, where not everyone, but I guess part of you comes with a bit of a feeling of like, well, do we need to bring another child into the world because there are lots of children already? I don't know. So there was almost like a feeling of like apology. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we'd like to have a child. So I'm just aware that I think that happens a lot for same-sex couples, almost that like having to apologize for why, like it's almost like that outside influence that Jess was talking about, in terms of feeling an outside influence of expectation of a girl baby. I guess I'm coming from it from like that outside influence of what impacts you, and I think that happens a lot about, you know, for people from different communities feeling like they're coming at it almost a bit apologetic of like, yeah, okay, well, this isn't maybe the norm, and maybe people think it's unnecessary. I don't think that many people do, but coming with it with that slight feeling of like, maybe that's why I didn't say anything about it for till 17 weeks to various people at work, because I came with it as slightly like, ooh, a bit apologetic. Did we need to do this? I don't know. There's an element of that as well, I think.
Yeah, that's human, isn't it, really?
You've all been amazing. I'm gonna wrap up, but thank you so much. I feel it's such a personal thing to talk about, so just thank you. 10 seconds, what's your advice to somebody who is going through this right now?
Just allow yourself to go through it, get the support that you need, feel the feelings, cry the tears, just allow it to kind of work its way, and eventually you'll feel a bit better.
Louise?
Well, yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, I think mine's similar really, is that to reach out, there will be somebody out there. You will know somebody who has been through something similar. You will know. So I think if you start talking about it and you don't get the reaction that works for you, don't take one person's reaction and think, oh, I'm not trying that again. Because that would have a really negative impact. I think it's hard sometimes, but there will, everyone will know somebody who's been through it and will be the right listening person for them. So just find that.
Mine again is going to be talk. And if you can, just every pregnancy be positive, I think. And that's the hardest thing, I think, to do.
Don't stop talking about it. Don't feel like you don't have someone there to support you, because there's always places that you can reach out to.